Joe Don Baker, a towering presence on both the big and small screens, passed away at the age of 89, leaving behind a legacy defined by rugged charisma, southern grit, and a remarkable ability to breathe life into characters who straddled the line between justice and vengeance. His death marks the end of an era for a breed of American actors who weren't afraid to bring raw emotion and steely resolve to their roles. Best known for his unforgettable portrayal of Sheriff Buford Pusser in the 1973 cult classic Walking. Tall, Baker became a symbol of frontier justice in an age when anti-heroes were just beginning to dominate American cinema. His life, marked by humble beginnings, breakout successes, and a career that spanned decades, is a testament to the enduring power of storytelling and the indelible impression one man can leave on the cultural landscape. Born on February 12, 1936, in Groesbeck, Texas, Joe Don Baker grew up in a world where hard work and quiet determination were the cornerstones of character. The rural town instilled in him a sense of groundedness that he would later bring to many of his roles. After studying at the University of North Texas, Baker served in the U.S. Army, an experience that no doubt contributed to the sense of discipline and moral clarity he so often conveyed on screen. His journey into acting began in earnest in the early 1960s with appearances in regional theater and guest spots on television shows. Though his early work was steady, it wasn't until the 1970s that he would become a household name, thanks in large part to a role that seemed to fit him like a well-worn sheriff's badge. Walking Tall exploded into theaters in 1973 and quickly cemented Baker's place in cinematic history. The film, based on the true story of Tennessee lawman Buford Pusser, struck a chord with audiences for its uncompromising portrayal of a man fighting corruption with little more than a big stick and an unshakable sense of justice. In a time of growing disillusionment with institutions, Baker's Pusser was a figure of cathartic retribution, willing to take the law into his own hands when the system failed him. What made Baker's performance resonate was his ability to portray both the strength and vulnerability of a man pushed to the edge. He wasn't invincible, but he was relentless. Critics praised his raw physical performance, and while the film itself was made on a modest budget, it became a massive box office success. For many, Walking Tall wasn't just a movie, it was a rallying cry. Despite being offered the opportunity to reprise his role in the film's sequels, Baker opted out, choosing instead to avoid being typecast. That decision, though risky, allowed him to explore a wider range of characters throughout his career. He went on to appear in a variety of films and television projects that showcased his range. In Charlie Varick, 1973, directed by Don Siegel and starring Walter Matthau, Baker took on the role of the icy hitman Molly, a stark departure from his previous heroics. His portrayal of Molly, calm and almost philosophical in his violence, proved that Baker could be just as effective as a villain. His performance helped elevate the film into a tense, noirish thriller and served notice that he was no one-trick pony. Baker's collaboration with director Don Siegel continued in the 1977 film The Outfit, where he played yet another morally ambiguous character. These roles underscored a trend in Baker's career. He excelled at playing men who lived in the gray areas, men for whom right and wrong weren't always so clearly defined. This moral complexity made his characters all the more compelling. He wasn't interested in playing clean-cut heroes or cartoonish villains. He wanted to portray people with scars, history, and purpose. The 1980s and 1990s brought a resurgence of interest in Baker's talents, particularly in action and crime genres. He appeared in Martin Scorsese's Cape Fear, 1991, alongside Robert De Niro and Nick Nolte, playing a detective hired to protect a family from a menacing ex-con. His calm yet commanding screen presence gave the role gravitas. That same decade, he would gain a new generation of fans with his appearances in the James Bond franchise. He played CIA agent Jack Wade in GoldenEye, 1995, and Tomorrow Never Dies, 1997, bringing a uniquely American swagger to the international espionage stage. His Bond character, dressed in Hawaiian shirts and speaking with a drawl, was a refreshing contrast to the typical slick professionalism of the MI6 universe. Though a supporting role, Wade was memorable and likable, a reminder of Baker's ability to command attention even in ensemble casts. Perhaps one of the most remarkable things about Joe Don Baker's career was his staying power in an industry that often discards actors as they age, Baker remained active, respected, and in demand well into the later years of his life. He appeared in Clint Eastwood's Mud, 2012, and made guest appearances on television shows that ranged from crime, dramas to sitcoms. His versatility was never in question. While some actors are defined by a single moment or role, Baker managed to transcend his most iconic performance, continually evolving without losing touch with the qualities that made him beloved: his authenticity, his commanding presence, and his deep connection to the roles he chose. Outside of his career, Joe Don Baker was a man of quiet dignity. Though he never courted the limelight off-screen, those who worked with him often spoke of his professionalism and humility. Unlike many stars of his generation, Baker never seemed interested in fame for fame's sake. He valued the work. Directors praised his preparedness and his uncanny ability to deliver powerful performances with seemingly little effort. Colleagues described him as someone who led by example, never flashy, but always effective. This sense of groundedness made him a steady presence in an industry often defined by instability. His passing at the age of 89 is a significant loss not only to those who knew him personally, but also to fans and film lovers who appreciated the kind of no-nonsense, emotionally honest performances that have become increasingly rare. In many ways, Baker represented a dying breed of American actor, one who relied less on special effects or celebrity status and more on the sheer force of character. He was a man who could walk into a scene and make you believe, whether he was wielding a nightstick or negotiating a backroom deal. For those who grew up watching him patrol the streets of Tennessee as Buford Pusser or later saw him trading banter with James Bond, Joe Don Baker will forever remain etched in memory as a symbol of strength and resilience. His films weren't always critical darlings, but they resonated because of the conviction he brought to each role. There was no pretense with Baker. What you saw was what you got, and what you got was someone who took his craft seriously and who understood the power of storytelling to move, to provoke, and to inspire. As the tributes pour in from fans, peers, and critics alike, the common thread among them is admiration, not just for the performances, but for the man behind them. Joe Don Baker may not have chased stardom, but he achieved something far greater. He earned respect. His career is a study in endurance, in staying true to oneself even when trends shift and tastes change. And now, as he takes his final bow, he leaves behind a legacy built not just on memorable roles, but on the strength of character that defined both his life and his work. There's something poetic about the fact that his most famous character, Buford Pusser, was a man who fought against the odds, took on the system, and tried to bring order to chaos, not unlike Baker's own journey in Hollywood. In an industry of illusions, Joe Don Baker was a rare figure of authenticity. He didn't need to pretend to be tough or principled. He simply was. His story, much like those he told on screen, is one of grit, endurance, and ultimately, triumph. As fans revisit his most iconic performances from the dusty roads of Walking Tall to the shadowy corners of Cape Fear, one thing becomes abundantly clear. Joe Don Baker wasn't just a character actor. He was a character in the best sense of the word. He brought to his roles not just a face or a voice, but a whole world of lived experience, quiet power, and inner tension. There was something unmistakably real about him. When Baker walked onto a screen, he brought with him a sense of presence that didn't need to be announced or underlined. It was simply there, quiet, firm, and immovable, like a slab of Texas limestone. In an age when acting is often filtered through layers of polish, posturing, and pretense, Baker's performances stood apart for their rawness and emotional truth. Whether he was playing a lawman, a villain, a detective, or a down-on-his-luck everyman, he always seemed to tap into something elemental about the human condition: pain, pride, fear, fury, resolve. Audiences instinctively trusted him. There was something about the way he carried himself, the set of his jaw, the narrow gaze, the slow, deliberate delivery of his lines, that made you believe he had seen things, lived through things, and come out the other side a little harder, a little wiser. Baker's authority didn't come from shouting or grandstanding. It came from restraint. He understood the power of silence, the tension of a look, the force of stillness. His characters were often men who didn't say more than they had to. They weren't poetic, but they were principled. They didn't speak often, but when they did, you listened. In Walking Tall, he gave us a performance that became a touchstone for a generation, something more than just entertainment. Buford Pusser wasn't a superhero. He was a man in pain, a man whose world had been ripped apart and who chose, against the odds, to take a stand. What Baker brought to that role was the searing conviction of someone who understood that justice often comes at a terrible personal cost. You could see it in his eyes, feel it in his movements, and hear it in every strained breath he took as he carried that massive club and stormed through the rot of corruption. There was something biblical about it. David against Goliath, wielding not a slingshot but sheer will. That performance didn't just resonate with audiences. It stuck to their bones. It made people cheer, cry, and clench their fists. It wasn't just a story. It was a battle cry. Later, in Cape Fear, he would play a very different kind of character, a quieter, more methodical protector. In the midst of Robert De Niro's manic menace and Nick Nolte's desperation, Baker's calm, confident detective was like a lighthouse in a storm. His performance served as an anchor to the film's spiraling chaos, reminding us that there are still people who do their jobs with integrity and a steady hand. That was the Baker trademark. He brought stability, even in the most volatile narratives. He was the rock on which the rest of the drama could break, but what truly made Joe Don Baker stand out was his refusal to be pigeonholed. He resisted easy categorization. He was capable of playing the villain as convincingly as the hero, sometimes within the same film. You were never entirely sure where his characters stood, and that ambiguity made them all the more fascinating. In Edge of Darkness, he gave a bone-chilling performance as a government operative with sinister motivations. He didn't need to twist his mustache or raise his voice to make you uneasy. He just had to stand there and let the weight of his character do the talking, and audiences, whether consciously or not, respected that. They understood that here was an actor who respected them enough not to spoon-feed emotions, who believed in nuance and complexity. His appeal crossed generations. Even as Hollywood changed, even as the tastes of audiences veered toward the flashy, the digital, the grandiose Baker remained relevant. Younger fans discovered him through his appearances in the James Bond films. As CIA agent Jack Wade, he injected humor, folksy charm, and credibility into a franchise often dominated by sleek, British cool. In Hawaiian shirts and khakis, Baker gave Bond fans something different. A reminder that espionage, too, could come with an accent from the American South and a stubborn sense of loyalty. His portrayal felt lived in, authentic. He wasn't pretending. To be tough, he just was. That authenticity is what kept directors coming back decade after decade. Behind the scenes, those who knew Baker personally spoke of his quiet generosity and deep sense of professionalism. He wasn't interested in fame games or Hollywood social climbing. He arrived on time, hit his marks, and treated the work and his colleagues with respect. There was a kind of nobility in his approach. He didn't chase awards, didn't lobby for attention. He let the work speak for itself, and it did, louder and longer than most. There's something bittersweet about the passing of someone like Joe Don Baker. It feels not just like the end of a life, but the closing of a chapter in American cinematic history. He came from a time when actors didn't need social media followings or glossy magazine covers to be stars. They needed talent, grit, and presence. And Baker had all three in spades. He belonged to the lineage of Gary Cooper, Charles Bronson, Lee Marvin, men who knew that true strength didn't always shout. Sometimes it whispered. Sometimes it just stood its ground. Even now, with his filmography preserved on streaming services and physical media, Baker's legacy continues to grow. Young actors study his performances for their restraint, their intensity, their authenticity. Fans rewatch his movies not just for nostalgia, but for the pleasure of seeing a master at work, someone who could say more in a glance than most actors could say in an entire monologue. His influence can be felt in every modern actor who tries to underplay rather than overact, in every filmmaker who believes in character over spectacle, in every viewer who still believes that truth, even in fiction, matters. With his passing, we lose not only a great actor, but a piece of the foundation upon which decades of storytelling were built. His voice, deep and unhurried, still echoes through the halls of American film. His presence, a blend of strength and sorrow, lingers in every scene he ever inhabited. His impact, though perhaps never fully acknowledged by award shows or read. Carpets is undeniable to those who truly understand the craft. They say some actors play roles while others become them. Joe Don Baker did something even rarer. He made you believe the character had lived long before the camera started rolling and would continue long after the credits ended. You didn't just see a man inhabiting a part, you saw a life fully formed, complete with invisible scars, old regrets, worn memories, and deeply held convictions. His characters felt like people you might pass on the street or sit beside in a diner, real, weathered, and quietly profound. He didn't need lengthy exposition or flashy dialogue to show you who they were. It was in the way they stood, the look in their eyes, the tone of a voice that carried both weight and weariness. With Baker, it was never just acting. It was breathing life into someone who, until that moment, had only existed on a page. This rare ability made his characters linger long after the screen went dark. You found yourself wondering what happened to them, where they went next. What became of them, because they had been made so believable, so fully human. In this way, Baker blurred the line between performance and presence. He didn't force emotion, he earned it. And that made all the difference in a world of artificiality. It's why so many of his characters resonated so deeply. People saw themselves, their fathers, their brothers, their friends in those roles. His portrayals were steeped in familiarity and depth, the kind that comes only from someone who genuinely understands the power of subtlety. He gave those characters lives, histories, and souls, not just as a craftsman, but as someone with a quiet reverence for storytelling. He made them matter. He elevated simple, often overlooked roles into moments of quiet power. In doing so, he made himself matter, not just to film buffs or critics dissecting performances, but to everyday people who turned on their televisions or walked into a theater hoping to feel something true. They saw in his characters the strength they hoped they had, the resilience they admired, and the truth they longed for. Baker didn't need to be flashy or loud to be unforgettable. He just needed to be real, and he always was. Joe Don Baker may have walked tall, but he also walked true, grounded in honesty, guided by integrity, and committed to authenticity in every role he embraced. And in the end, that's what made all the difference. His legacy isn't built solely on the roles he played, but on the lives he touched through them.